Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. So glad that you're here. Today, we're talking about something that we all care about, how to get more out of your data co-op. I'm Amber Hobson, Vice President of Client Success here at Wyland, and I'll be your host for today's session. I'm joined by my two lovely colleagues, Julie Hansen, Senior Director of Client Success, and Hayley Howard, who is our Senior Director of Predictive Analytics. Before we jump in, I have just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The session is being recorded, so you'll get a link afterward. The chat is private. I'll be monitoring questions, so go ahead and put them in as we're going along, and I'll share them with the panel for a Q&A at the end. And if we don't get to your question live, we'll follow up with you directly. If you run into any technical issues, audio or video, just try refreshing your browser and you should be able to jump right back in. All right, with that, let's go ahead and jump in ourselves. To start us off, I'd love to level set, especially for those who might be newer to the co-op scene. So Julie, can you help us define what a data co-op is and why nonprofits should care?
Absolutely. So, because co-op databases have been around for decades, we want to really just start with a quick reminder of what cooperative means. At its core, it's about working together. Organizations contributing data so that the collective value is greater than any one organization could accomplish alone. So, as the saying goes, a rising tide lifts all boats. So why would an organization participate in a co-op? We like to keep it simple, and that's find, keep, grow. So you want to find the right high-value donors. You want to keep them engaged and loyal. And then you want to grow their value over time. The co-op data is what makes that possible, and data is really at the heart of everything we do.
And your best donors support more than one organization. So Wyland custom modeled audiences use all of the available data that we have in our co-op to find the best prospects because we're looking at behavior across thousands of organizations. Especially in the current climate where disposable income can be a bit tight for many people, it becomes more important to be efficient in finding those donors and who still have the ability to donate. So in the example on this slide, we're looking at the Wyland nonprofit database on the left. The average donor has given to just under 3 organizations in the last 24 months. When we create a custom modeled audience, that number is much higher. You can see on the right, it's 2 to 3 times higher because all of the data available to models and the predictive power of statistical modeling methods. So we're helping you select the best however many records you need for your campaign with all of that data. So these audiences were both 1 to 2 million records, and an average number for a much smaller audience would be even higher. Modeling prioritizes donors with stronger giving signals. That means these audiences are built with intent based on real behavior patterns, not just static attributes. This is just an example of one statistic of how Wyland audiences are finding and identifying stronger prospects. And those prospects that give to multiple organizations are more likely to donate again. They're more open to new organizations. They're active and engaged donors, and they're likely not single issue donors. So if you send them a mail piece or market to them in some way, they're more likely to respond. Co-ops can provide better prospects on a broader scale than any other method. And the only way to consistently find those donors is through better, more complete data.
So this comes up a lot because we hear people say that their donors only give to them. But what we're seeing here with the data and what you're saying, Hayley, is not only are donors supporting multiple organizations, but they're actually stronger prospects and could be donors in the donor situation because of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right, so now that we have defined what a co-op is and why an organization might participate, let's talk about what participation actually looks like. So the foundation of the co-op starts with data, and that's exactly where we're going to start. So who wants to walk us through the types of data that are most important to share?
I can do that, Amber. So really what you're looking at on this slide is how we drive the best results for our clients. And again, it comes down to all the data that you contribute. So the more data you provide, the more detailed and the more frequent, the better results you're going to get from Wyland ultimately. And it comes down to these three categories of data. The donor data is your donor, non-donors, like event participants, volunteers, etc. It's where suppression flags would come in. As you move towards the second and third component, that's where the power of the data starts to come in. As Amber and Hayley just talked about, we know that most of these donors are giving to multiple organizations, so they're already part of the co-op. The power is that additional transactional activity that we have from them. So the transaction data is just that, what you see here. It's the gift amount and date, donation type and channel. Important that we get channel promoted and channel donated. Payment method, source and campaign codes, those type of details. Moving to campaign data that gets even more granular, now we're looking at actual point in time and predicting response. Who responded and who didn't? And how can we build that most successful predictive model for you using that level of detail? So the most important thing to keep in mind here is that it isn't necessarily across just your data that you're giving us that makes this so powerful. It's because we're getting those transactions and that depth across thousands of organizations. So again, we're all in this together and we want to work together so everyone can be successful, and every client providing that data and those details on a regular basis is what makes the co-op so powerful.
Yeah, and to add on to that, this is one of our favorite slides, and we've called this woman Susan. With all the data contributed by our members, Wyland adds color to what fundraisers typically see. So on the left side is the typical view that a fundraiser might have into Susan. And this is useful, but it is limited. It tells us what Susan has done, but it does not give us too much detail into who she is and what she's interested in. So on the right side, this is the Wyland comprehensive view. So we have a more complete view of the individual. It's not just nonprofit giving, it is also behavior across categories. So we include broader donation history, retail and other vertical data, demographics and life stage, as well as interests and activities. We're constantly working on adding more data sources to better paint this picture too. All of this data gives us a deeper understanding of Susan and every donor that we have, with stronger signals around intent and a better ability to predict future behavior. That more complete view does not happen in isolation. It's driven by how often and how consistently data is updated across the co-op. So when everyone updates, everyone benefits. To Julie's metaphor, this really is a rising tide lifts all boats situation. The more organizations that participate in the co-op, just period, and then the more frequently the data is updated, the stronger the overall data set becomes. And that strength applies across the entire co-op. More complete and current data updates provide stronger signals for everyone. Modeling captures patterns that are not visible through a human analysis so that audiences stay aligned with how donors are behaving recently. And especially in these last couple of years with the economy being all over the place, it's really important to hone in on recent behavior, and finding, again, those people who might still have some disposable income to donate. Your own data updates impacts the frequency of your audiences too. So this is not just contribute data to help the whole co-op, it's to help your own audiences as well. Frequent updates means that we can send cleaner audiences back to you. So recent donors are withheld from audiences in accordance with whatever you've set up for your merge. And so we will provide fewer names back that then just are removed in your merge if your data is not fully updated, for example, and someone donated last month and we provide you an audience, we don't want to send that person back to you because you already have them on your file and we don't want to send them to you as a prospect. So better data does not just improve insights, it also leads to those more efficient and higher performing audiences for your organization.
Yeah, so I'm going to drive this point home a little bit further because it's really important, and we do see where sometimes organizations can fall into we don't have time to do a data update right now. Let's just go. We'll update you afterwards. This isn't just about better modeling. It's also about cost and donor experience. So, if we're providing a prospect list, and I think Hayley mentioned this or alluded to it, and we don't have a recent file update, we could be sending you names that you already have. So it means you're paying for something that you don't need. Same thing on the house file side. If we're not working with current data, you could be paying for names that should be suppressed, like a do not mail name, your active donor file, and we wouldn't know that without that frequent data update. So we've talked about data inputs. Now let's shift to data outputs. So how does incomplete data, how can that lead to the wrong conclusions, especially when it comes to channels?
So we keep telling you how important and powerful data is because it does drive everything we do, so we're passionate about it. Incomplete data can really lead us down the wrong path. So we're going to use an example of an organization who's reporting 65% of their donors are coming from online channels. It's natural to say, move more investment to online programs. But that isn't really giving us the full picture. So let's take a look at Susan. She really was introduced to the organization via a direct mail piece. And that's how she read the letter and became passionate about this mission. Took some time. She chose online as her donation channel, but direct mail really did drive that. So we're not here to solve all attribution, but just explaining how that incomplete data can, again, lead us down this wrong path. And by giving that complete data to us, understanding promotion channel and donation channel allows us to build stronger and stronger models over time. Because keep in mind, this isn't just what, in this case, Susan is doing with you. It's a donor's activity across thousands of organizations. So we are really able to capture their true preferences and behaviors and then turn that into predictive modeling for all of our clients.
It's a great point, Julie. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to move into some strategy. Julie, I think you're going to walk us through why involving your co-op partners is so important across the whole donor journey.
Yes, absolutely. So what we find, this is showing the whole donor journey, and what we find across many organizations is that they fail to look at co-op beyond acquisition. And it's really important to understand that the power of our data goes far beyond that first gift. So the challenge is, if acquisition is where it stops, and this isn't anything new to anyone on this call, but it becomes very expensive very quickly. So you're creating that leaky bucket situation that people like to talk about. You know, you're filling the bucket, but you're really not maximizing their long-term value. So you just continue on this cycle. So what we do at Wyland is really help you shift from that transactional approach to viewing this donor over their whole life cycle. And that does start with smart acquisition. So we're using that cooperative data to attract the right high value donor that will support your mission long term. So then the real power now starts after that first gift. Again, the cooperative database power can help you long beyond that first gift. So we're modeling to help you with retention. How do they like to be contacted? How can you keep those donors loyal and remaining with your cause over time? And then we can also use our data to help you who is good for upgrade, whether that be to sustainer, mid-level, and major donor programs. But it's really getting us into this execution of acquisition, retention, and upgrade. We'll go back to that find, keep, grow, so that ultimately we're helping your organization become less transactional and more developer of long-term relationships. So think of it as not a revolving door, but you're developing this long-term relationship with those donors who will support your mission long-term. And again, the data is what's going to drive all of this. Yeah. So if you think about everything we've been talking about, this is really a picture of that in action. And I am belaboring this point, but data is really at the center of everything we do. So here you'll see it in the center of this as well. But what it leads to really three kind of areas that we can help you. And the first are those audience solutions we've been talking about. And that's where we can build custom modeling per each organization's metrics, goals, and then insights and analytics. We can help you to understand your donors and non-donors better. How do they want to be communicated with? What do they like? What are their preferences? And then finally, optimization for that long-term revenue and relationship. And that can be anything from, full file donor modeling, lapsed modeling, our giving signals tool, all of those things that help you optimize that relationship and communicate with them in the way that they most likely will respond.
Yeah, and so getting into my area of the world a little bit more, powering the donor life cycle starts with having that consistent and committed approach across all four of the areas on this slide. So we want to aim to align on goals and share them with all partners so that the right audiences can be built, tested in a structured way, and then ultimately scaled. So all of this starts with alignment. Having open communication with your Wyland client success representative is super important to keep everyone moving in the same direction. When those goals are clearly defined, it sets the foundation for everything that follows. From there, the focus shifts to my team working very closely with the client success team to build an audience that aligns with the goals that you've communicated and set up a strong test. And testing is really tricky. There's so many factors at play, all the way from the data load all the way to results measurement. There's the merge, there's mail, there's campaigns, there's all sorts of things within that spectrum that make a test, really. So no single audience is always going to work. It's not going to work forever, which is why it's important to continually test new audiences against your current best performers. So once an audience is proven, that's when it makes sense to scale. Expand what's working and increase volume with confidence. Continue to monitor performance of those audiences relative to goals over time. And this is not to say that you have to be scaling all the time forever. I know that's unrealistic. There's many campaigns that stay the same volume for a long time. But even within those, we want to make sure that there's a small test, ideally like on deck, to make sure that we're setting you up for success moving forward. So when all of these pieces come together, that's when we'll see the best results.
All right, we have worked through data and strategy. Now let's talk about those results. So, Hayley, help us understand, how does Wyland think about results, and how should organizations be evaluating performance?
Yeah. So once a campaign is out in the world, the focus has to shift to evaluating performance. And I know many of you wear a lot of hats, and so you might be working on the next campaign and also measuring the last one. So this is it's a lot. There's a lot going on. And hopefully we can provide some insight here. So reporting on metrics is key. To turn results into action, we need clear and consistent measurement and well-defined goals, like I said before. Looking at performance the same way over time really helps us understand what's working and where to go next. Equally important is to set the expectations up front by aligning on the content of the latest campaign package and the goals for the audience. So if your premium offer changed, or you switched from premium to non-premium, it's really helpful for everyone to understand that, so that expectations for how an audience will do are aligned. Performance should always be viewed in the context of seasonality, the broader campaign environment, and the package that's being sent out. Not every model segment will perform exactly the same way on every campaign. With that, we recommend evaluating performance holistically. That means looking at total campaign performance rather than at each model and each segment individually. Because each model contributes to the audience as a whole, success comes from understanding how it all works together to drive the overall result. And I think it's always really helpful to see this in practice. So Julie has a real example to show us.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to get at here is just how important communication is, and the partners that we have the most success with, we're in really pretty constant communication with and getting results on a regular basis so that we're able to review these. What we want to talk about today is just that opportunity of looking at things through different lenses. We've chosen to focus here on why we think in some cases it's so important to evaluate performance holistically. So in this case, you can see the client's goals here. Response rate exceeded by 15%. Average gift by 14%. So the ultimate result is this client says, this is a successful campaign, and we will continue with the Wyland audience. This exceeded our metrics. Now, if we were to look at this in a more granular view, knowing that the client's main KPI is response, we're looking at these segments in red that would now be cut from the plan. So in this case, we would challenge this organization to look at this holistically, because the ultimate result is almost 6,000 fewer donors and a loss of revenue of 192,000. So really what's happening is those stronger performing segments are paying for the lower performing segments, but you have now captured almost 6,000 donors that you can cultivate and turn into long-term supporters of your mission. And again, turning them into long-term supporters of your mission comes from using that rich Wyland data and predictive modeling we can help you with. Now, we chose this example because it's exciting and results are great. There are certainly cases where segment by segment granular level analysis is needed when results aren't meeting KPIs. And again, that's where communication comes in. We want to work with you on that to maximize the performance of each campaign. We just want to make sure that everyone knows from us our recommendation is to look at things multiple ways, because every organization is unique, and we want to make sure we're just not focused on short-term gains, but actually looking at long-term results and what will help this organization most successfully achieve its mission.
So this is a really interesting example. Actually love this example. So there's two models being used here, a response model and a revenue model. So Hayley, can you talk us through what your thoughts are on modeling to specific KPIs? And are there some that are KPIs that are harder to model than others?
Yeah. So from the analytics perspective, every model is optimized to a primary objective, either response or revenue. And that's because each one requires a different modeling approach. There, unfortunately, is not any way around that. It's just how the math works and how statistical models operate. The important thing to understand here is that optimizing for one or the other will always come with trade-offs. A model with a high response rate, like we saw in Julie's example, will have a lower average gift. A model built for revenue may have a higher average gift, but a lower overall donor volume. Cost per donor is a little bit different because it requires more visibility into your campaign. If that is the metric we're tasked with optimizing, or any other metric that is a calculation that has some of your costs included in it, we need to understand the full scope of what we're doing, the full campaign costs. Otherwise, we're just one input into the metric and we don't have a lot of insight into the rest. And so we can't tweak our models in the same way that we can when we have that full picture. And balancing the objectives can be difficult. There's no single model that maximizes everything at once. That's why, as a company, we provide results at the level, or we provide audiences at the level that you see in those results. So we had two models, and then I think we had like well over 5 segments in each. And so if you do need to cut out a portion, it's very easy to do so. You can get rid of segment 7 if you need to, because it's not meeting your goal, because the campaign as a whole is not meeting your goal. So each approach prioritizes something different, and the trade-offs are a part of that campaign planning. So the goal is to find that right combination of models and tweak it as needed to make up an audience that aligns with your goals. If that is, next time we want segments 1 through 5 because our campaign is a little bit smaller, then we can absolutely do things like that.
Thank you for that insight, Hayley. And so what I'm hearing you say is it really brings us back to alignment. So strong performance starts with clear goals, shared expectations. And so that moves us into refining strategy. So again, the biggest takeaway from today really comes back to communication. Regular check-ins on results, on goals, on priorities are critical because when things change, and we know that it changes all the time. We know it's going to change. Your strategy needs to adjust with it. So I think Hayley mentioned earlier the example of like if we modeled on premium data and now you're mailing a non-premium package, that's a disconnect that we really need to better understand and account for that so we can change our strategy. All right. I want to make sure that we leave time for questions. So if you have one, feel free to drop it in the chat. While those come in, I do want to throw out one question that we've been hearing sort of whispered among the halls lately, and that is, should organizations be concerned about over-reliance on co-ops? So I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll take this one, and I am passionate about it, and I'll admit maybe I'm a little biased too, but I think my answer and opinion is valid. So I really don't think organizations should be concerned about this. And really, we got here on purpose. So this wasn't an accidental arrival at this data-driven acquisition solution. And really, so I think going back to kind of a little bit of an evolution of acquisition programs where you start with, maybe the spray and pray method, they call it, where you're just hoping for donors. And then it got more intelligent into the list rental and compiled data, where list rental is well, your donors would probably also like to donate to me. And then if I choose a little bit more recent, and again, some of these approaches, there's a lot of guesswork in there. And then the compiled data, they look like my donors. Well, then we got to the co-ops coming around. And again, this was decades ago. And it started to be, well, if we brought all this together and aggregated it, could we use a data-driven approach that predicts those most likely to respond and eliminates the waste? And that's where we've been today. And I think we already talked a little bit about, these donors are in the co-ops. So the transactions and all of those organizations providing or adding that depth. But whether it's through co-op or the industry, we're all in this together. So those would be the same organizations you're relying on without predictive modeling. And so the predictive modeling, in my opinion, actually should make it less concerning.
All right. Hayley, I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute. So we talk a lot about modeling in the broad sense, but what about more of the niche audiences, like a sustainer or digital donors or high value? When should organizations start thinking about maybe modeling those separately, or how to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to one of the main points of this presentation is send us as much data as you'll allow us to have. If we have that file of sustainers, we can use that in a model to find people who share similar characteristics to that group to either create a prospect audience or find people on your file that look like that group too. So when when we're doing things like that, we can also rank your file of sustainers maybe to find people who are more likely to donate at a mid-level or a major donor, whatever that might be. Sorry, I forgot the second half of your question.
I had asked, when should they start thinking about
Oh, yeah.
modeling them separately?
Yeah. I think if you are aiming to have a sustainer specific ask, or you want to have a sustainer specific ask, or a mid-level or a major, this applies to any of these things. If you're aiming to have a specific ask or marketing strategy, that's when we should start modeling on those groups specifically.
Right. We do have a question in the chat. So how should I prioritize my co-ops in the merge?
Ooh, good question.
That is a good question. I'll give my opinion. Maybe we
Yeah.
all three have. I say it depends, but ultimately for me, I believe that it's best for organizations when it's fair. I think co-ops should be randomly allocated, and you're going to get the best from the multiple co-ops you're using by employing that strategy. Because really what it's going to do too is you're then able to challenge each co-op partner. And again, you can look at these as your different list sources and challenge each to get a better result and see how things are interacting in the merge. I personally think that when you start getting into priority, you really don't know who's performing better because you're giving someone a top spot. And so I know there are this conversation could probably take a full hour, if not more. So certainly don't pretend to have all of the answers. But again, ultimately, I think that it's best for organizations if there's random allocation. Amber, Hayley, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that also allows you to capitalize and, work more with your multis too, with those records that are coming from multiple sources that are going to be extremely valuable. Yeah, I think that's all I have on that.
Yeah. I'm good. So I'm laughing because there's a question that just came in, and it actually, I was going to ask another question, and my answer to it is the answer to this question. So I'll just ask it. Do I really need to share high donors with the co-op? And my question that I was going to ask and answer as was what are the biggest gaps you typically see in nonprofit data? And my answer, and you guys can and share yours. Um, my answer for the biggest gaps, it depends. It depends. And so what we often see is organizations who get really ingrained with us and they're loving all of the different ways that we can get engage with them and help them cultivate, find, keep, and grow their donors. And they're like, hey, I want to find more high value donors. And we're like, that's great, but you're not contributing those to the co-op. So that's when it becomes a problem. So that's where I see typically the biggest gaps in data is when somebody's not sharing a piece of data, but yet they want us to provide them with insights on that. I'll let Julian and Hayley
Amber,
answer
I
as
was
well.
just going to add to that, Amber, that one of the dangers with that, specifically just to your high value donor example, is depending on where you cut that level, it can really impact the result of a response model build. And of course, I'm probably taking Hayley's answer, but what happens is those high value donors become non-responders to that campaign. So you're really losing the true picture of what happened in that campaign.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to my point from earlier about the number of sources that each individual has donated to, um, we probably already have that person in the co-op and across multiple other sources. And so while they might be donating more to you, we do have them elsewhere with with the rest of their donation history. And if we don't, we're not including them in things either. So there is a backboard there as well.
Yeah, great point. Okay, so this question might be controversial. So thoughts on prior order suppression?
Don't do it.
Hayley's like, not controversial at all. Just don't
Not
do it.
controversial. No, prior order suppression, I understand the logic behind it, but all of the research that my team has done and that we have seen is that mailing more times does not negatively impact someone's likelihood to respond. Now, if you're mailing, I was just talking to a client yesterday, if you're mailing 4 times a month, yeah, maybe we need to split things up somehow. But if you're mailing monthly or even twice a month, the data supports continuing to mail that person. It also contributes to results swinging wildly back and forth from one campaign to the next. So when you suppress the best prospect or you ship the best prospects in one campaign, your results are high. And then you don't ship those in the next campaign and your results drop and then they go back up when those people aren't suppressed. And it's just this like vicious cycle. So we strongly recommend not doing prior order suppression.
And I would say this is where art meets science. And from client success side, I agree with Hayley. In most cases, we're saying no, but I would have answered it depends because we do have to look at certain situations where the results might lean us towards that. And are we seeing things that start to support that and need to put different strategies in place? And again, less of a prior order suppression and more of a, I don't want to get into the details, but there are strategies that we can provide where we're trying to limit those bumps in performance. But ultimately, I think one of the things that is so important is I think in almost all cases, I'll agree with Hayley here in that almost all cases, I would say, we don't recommend anyone use prior order suppression year end. And then the real danger becomes January, February campaigns. You have all of these really large end of season mailings. And for those of you that have a non-year end powerful season, anytime you're then, like Hayley's saying, you have prior order suppression in place of these monster mailings that just absolutely decimate the smaller mailing after. So I guess it's again going back to where we talked about looking at things through multiple lenses. We really want to make sure that we're just looking at it through multiple lenses and not just we omit prior order. That's how it's going to be. And just making sure that we're strategically doing that in the very limited cases where that might make sense.
And if you are going to do it, I will allow it occasionally. If you have to do it, I strongly suggest suppressing the entire mail file with all of your data providers. So rather than Wyland suppressing Wyland names, then one of our competitors may provide you with that name for this campaign that they didn't ship last time. So it just ends up that all the sources too are just trading names back and forth if it's not done correctly. And correctly to me is suppressing the full prior campaign from the next shipment.
All right. If I give the co-op all of my donors, can you have all of them suppressed from the prospect names you give me?
Yes, very easily. That's a pretty standard practice for us. We don't recommend doing every single one of them, especially if your data goes back the 10 years that we typically request. Just because a person who donated to you 10 years ago and has not donated since, is probably a good person to try to market to again. So while we don't recommend doing the full suppression file, or full donor file as the suppression, we can do it if we have to.
Yeah, and
Like,
I'll just add that if you're doing the full suppression file, we really want to make sure that you have those lapsed reactivation and donor modeling
Yeah.
solutions in place so you're not losing the value of those older donors. And so really what we like to say is, let's match the suppression with who you're actively know that you're contacting. And if you're not contacting those lapsed donors, we should, as Hayley said, allow them into the acquisition universe. And once a donor gets to a certain point lapsed, they really start to behave more like a prospect anyway. So we just want to be really careful. And, this is one of those things too, getting into suppression strategy, where we don't want to set it and forget it. So we really want to be in constant communication about what the right strategy is. And going back to how should I prioritize co-ops in my merge? This now is when you're working with multiple co-ops, those suppressions need to match across all partners.
And also to add, we can do a lot with the non-donors as well. If you have a file of event attendees, we can treat that file like prospects, and rank it if you'd like. We can suppress it from our audiences if that's the way you want to go, if you're handling them internally. We have a lot of ways to slice up your file, and rank it to provide back to you in whatever, form or slice you'd like.
Hayley, I think I have one more question for you here.
Okay.
What are the risks of over-segmenting or modeling too narrowly? And how do you strike the right balance? So, and I'll just add, I've maybe seen this when an organization wants to do a pre-select, like they think maybe it's on recency, maybe it's on high value. We've seen like zip codes that they want to target. That's
Right.
not specific. It's for their selection of their audience, not because they're targeting that area. So talk to us about modeling too narrowly and dangers in that.
Yeah. So one of the things I feel like I'm constantly saying is we want to model on the characteristics of your donors. And so whether that's with mail files or with our lookalike profile model solutions, we want to determine using the statistical modeling what the characteristics of your donor looks like. And if we narrow that too far, we risk the model being really biased in the model development. And when we go to rank our nonprofit database with that model, it's not able to accurately see what the characteristics of your donors make them different from the rest of the nonprofit universe. And so it's all everyone who works with a co-op has heard ad nauseum about bias. So I don't want to get too far into that, but it's all about biasing the model towards a very specific group of people that isn't necessarily accurate to who we actually want in the audience.
So let the model do the work, is what you're saying.
Let the model do the work. Exactly. Yeah. But on the flip side of that, if you only want to provide an audience of women or men or within a certain geographic area, we can do things like that. I don't necessarily see a ton of value in the gender stuff for nonprofits. That tends to be more on our retail side. But if you do want to do that, again, communicate with your client success director and have a conversation about here's the goal, here's the type of person that we want, and can we get there?
Perfect. Oh, I was just about to wrap it up. We got another question. Do you need responder files with the mail files to build models?
No. Short answer is no. We like them, but we don't have to have them.
I think this would go to, yeah, I think it would go to depends. Because in Amber's case, where are you not providing everything to us? My example of you're missing the full picture. If you know that you're holding donors and not sending everything to the co-op, that would be a really, really good case where you would want to provide responder files.
Yep. All right. One last question. I'll direct it to both of you. So where do you see the biggest missed opportunities today?
Do you want me to start, Hayley?
Sure.
I see the biggest missed opportunity and what we talked about a little bit earlier, and just organizations looking at us as an acquisition only source. We really have the data is so rich and we can help in all areas of that donor life cycle. So for example, giving signals, that's helping to identify those likely to be sustainers, mid and major donors, seasonality. There is so much power there. You know, the phone preference, online preference. There's so much power beyond that first gift. And I think organizations are missing out on those opportunities by solely focusing on the acquisition piece of what we can do for them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And from my perspective, going in kind of a different direction from Julie, I think clients are missing out on cultivating their donor file in a consistent way. Every 6 months or so, my team starts to hear, oh, we want to boost our house file numbers, or okay, now we want average gift. And it's like there's just this back and forth from one metric to the other, one focus to the other. And ideally, we're aiming for kind of somewhere in between. And like the example we showed earlier, aiming for goals that are somewhere in between and creating audiences that meet the goals somewhere in the middle so that we're helping you boost your donor file while also getting a sufficient average gift to help support your program. When the focus keeps shifting, it is difficult to build audiences off of the data that has had those goalposts moved all the time and determine scalability with proper tests.
Right. All right. Well, we are coming up on time. This has gone by really fast. I do want to thank Julie and Hayley for sharing their insights and experience today. I hope everyone is walking away with a few clear ideas of how you can actually put it into practice. Before you go, you'll see a quick three-question survey pop up. Your feedback really helps us improve these sessions, so we'd appreciate you taking a moment to complete it. As a reminder, you'll also receive a link to the recording so you can revisit anything we covered or share it with your colleagues. And if you asked a question and we didn't get to it, somebody from our team will follow up directly. So if today's conversation sparked ideas, we'd love to keep the conversation going. Feel free to visit wyland.com or reach out to one of us directly. Thanks again for spending time with us. We really appreciate you being here and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much.